Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me just say that we get it. Personal development can be hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Project Endure has been on a mission to create a supportive and inspiring community of people, all striving to be better together. Head down to the link in the show notes and join the Hard Things Club so that we can do hard things together. And if you're already a member, invite a friend and spread the love. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 189. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in the great state of New Jersey, we have a very, very, very special guest, Tyler Van Binscoten. Tyler, how are you?
What's going on, man? Happy to be on. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I've been really looking forward to this. And just for people listening who might know you, Tyler, you go by Tyler Van, and I learned about 30 seconds ago that your full last name is Van Binscoten. So tell us what ethnicity is Van Binscoten?
So it's Dutch. I'm Dutch and Italian. My dad is Dutch and Italian. My mom is fully Italian. And yes, my last name is very long, 13 letters. It's something I've been dealing with my whole life with mispronunciations. It's kind of funny at this time, but I've been going by Van just to make everybody's life easier.
Yeah. So, all right, if we were to have you introduce yourself to the people listening, but the catch is you can't talk at all about any accomplishments, any titles, any names that you have given to you by the world in terms of, a profession, a career, etc. How would you introduce yourself?
Wow, it's always interesting when you can't take into account your occupation and hobbies and what you love to do. I would say that my name is Tyler. I'm just a guy who's trying to figure life out and take every day full speed and get the most out of each day.
I love that. And we're going to have so much to talk about. I think you and I have a lot in common, the way that we see the world, our perspectives, they align. And I'm going to read something that you wrote, and then I would love for you to expand on that if you can. And so you had written, you don't know everything, you won't know everything, and you don't need to know everything. Stop pressuring yourself to have all the answers. You don't need to have it all figured out. The majority of what you consider successful do not have it all figured out. Life is a daily process. Just go with the flow and roll with the punches. Get out there and just go for it. Sometimes the best plan is to not have one at all. Things aren't always going to go your way or as expected. Learn to adapt and overcome whatever is thrown at you. You don't need to have it all figured out to achieve greatness. Tell us more.
So I've always been somebody who's put a lot of pressure on myself to have a plan, have things in order, know all the answers. And I actually had come across a quote one time that said, it's okay to not have an answer, but it's not okay to not know the answer to the same question asked twice. And I realized that you don't need to put all this pressure on yourself to know everything. It's why specialties exist in the world, but you should be putting forth effort daily to do the best that you can. And as long as you are doing that, then it's okay. So many times people are trying to make like they know everything because they feel this pressure to do so. And it's just not the case. You don't need to know all the answers. And quite frankly, you're going to be figuring it out as you go.
Yeah. So it's interesting for me to sit here on the other end because I've had so many conversations where these bits and pieces connect. And it was episode 117 of this podcast that I had Luke Hopkins on. Him and I talked about not having all the answers and how, that is okay to not have all the answers in this moment, to not know exactly where you're going. And then episode 151 with Andy Chen, who is also a physical therapist like you and I. And him and I got a little bit into the idea of being wrong, and being in a clinical setting, having someone coming to you for answers, right? That is what someone wants. They want answers and solutions. And there are times, more often than I think most healthcare providers would like to admit, that you don't have the answers. And how you handle that is so important. And I think coming from a place of ego, the way to handle that is to make something up, beat around the bush, fumble your way through a response to try to make it sound like you know what you're talking about. But maybe the more humble and real way to approach a situation like that, when you don't have the answer in healthcare or otherwise, is to say, you know what, I don't know. However, let me figure it out with you. I'm going to give my best effort and we're going to find the answers. What has this concept of not having everything figured out, how is that tied into healthcare for you?
So, one of the first things I tell all my doctoral students, especially when they're on level 1 or upwards of level 4, is that healthcare is not a fake it till you make it type of business. We're dealing with people's lives, whether you're in an acute care setting, you're an outpatient orthopedics, you are a orthopedic surgeon, you're a cardiothoracic surgeon, whatever we do, however we fall on the scale of complexity, it's not a fake it till you make it business. And I tell all my students that, and I let them know that patients will appreciate somebody more that says, "Hey, I've never come across this pathology before. I've never seen this present the way that's presenting. I'm going to refer you to who I need you to be referred to, or I don't know the answer to that question. I'm going to do some research and get back to you," rather than somebody who is stumbling on their words or trying to make like they know just for the sake of not being embarrassed that they don't. And I think a reason why I consider myself successful in the healthcare setting and why patients believe in me so much is because I am constantly telling them how it is, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I let them know, like, hey, there's been plenty of times where I said, hey, I don't think I'm the therapist for you. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get you to your specific goals. And maybe you need to see somebody else. Maybe physical therapy is just not right for you in general. And I think patients that do hear that end up actually staying because they didn't expect me to be so real with that answer.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, people just want two main things out of other people. It's one, are you honest? Are you going to tell me the truth? Are you going to be direct? Can I trust you? And then two, are you going to give your best effort for me and with me? There's this great quote by Lou Holtz who said, the answers to these questions will determine your success or failure. One, can people trust me to do what's right? Two, am I committed to doing my best? Three, do I care about other people and show it? If the answers to these questions are yes, there's no way you can fail. Any thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I love all those points, and it's so true. I just think that if you are an honest and genuine human being, and this applies to all aspects of life and all fields of study, as long as you're being authentic, genuine, and you're putting forth effort, I think you'll make it in life.
I
I
couldn't
genuinely feel that's the truth.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And one other thing on figuring it out slash not having it figured out that I'd love to talk a little bit about before we get into the deeper part of this conversation is, you know, I'm 4 years into building this business. I was very grateful to have you at this year's Project Endure event. That
What
was
an
our
effort, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's a work in progress, right? Each year it changes, it grows, and improves. And you know, last year, so not 2025, but 2024, I stood up in front of everybody, and there was this moment when I was talking to everybody where I realized this was what I was looking for, and it wasn't a metric. It wasn't something I could have mapped out on paper. It wasn't something I ever could have defined. I needed to feel it, and it was a feeling that I had been chasing, for those first 3 years of building a business, and I didn't know it until I felt it. And I think a lot of times in life, people will ask the question or try to, reflect on what does success look like for me,
Mhm.
and I think it's important to think about what does success feel like for me. And feeling is a bit more abstract. It's a bit harder to define. And I think that being okay with not having it all figured out, also, you have to be open to the possibilities that you might not know it until you feel it someday. And that's okay. But you shouldn't stop pursuing things just because it's ambiguous or you're not sure what it looks like. And I'd just be curious to hear if there are things in there that resonate with you, what your path has been so far, and are there moments where you felt, hey, I'm on the right path right now?
Yeah, so I want to go back to one of the points you mentioned about how success kind of correlates to how you feel and not so much more about a definition. And I think that's important for a lot of listeners to understand is that success is so abstract. You know, success to me is going to be very different than success to you. And often I feel many, including myself at some point in time, were striving for this definition of success. And I wasn't, I don't think people strive to gain that feeling of success. And I think it's something that just clicks and you know in that moment that you are on the right path. And I certainly feel that way in my personal growth. I feel that way in my career that I am getting to where I want to be and my vision and what I have in terms of giving back to the community. And I have that feeling. And I've learned that as long as you are on the path and you are making strides to continue towards your vision, you're doing it. You are successful. And as long as you are in the process, that's all that matters. So, people, including myself, and it's a daily reminder for me, is that I need to be less concerned about achieving these hard set milestones and these definitions of, okay, I will be successful if this, and just kind of enjoy the process of getting to that feeling that I'm craving. And it's a good point that you brought that up, that you kind of just felt it in that moment. And I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and one other thing that I wasn't planning on bringing up right now, but it feels right. Speaking of feeling, is so you've written a book, and we'll talk a bit about some of the lessons behind that. I've written a chapter in a book. I write a blog. I've had a newsletter. I do a lot of writing. I think that's something you and I share in common. And up on my whiteboard, which is behind my computer, nobody can see it. I have written writer and then a greater sign author, meaning that I am striving to be someone who writes, a writer, embracing the process over someone who has a title or an achievement or, check the box, do this thing. And as someone who's written a book, I would imagine you do a lot of writing behind the scenes that nobody else gets to see, just writing for you. Tell me about the power of the writing that you just do for you behind the scenes that the public never sees.
So it's two things because I think it'll segue into kind of how I created the book. But I write daily, and what capacity that is varies on a day-to-day basis. Whether it's on my phone, in my notes, if I'm quickly grabbing a bite to eat at work and I have an idea, I'm jotting it down in my phone because it is so nice to just get it off my mind and decompress and then come back to it later to reflect. Even on a day-to-day basis, there's so many times that I open my laptop, I'm answering emails, I'm doing whatever I need to do, an idea comes into my mind, or I just need to vent about something. I have a whole document and I write it down. I mean, as you can imagine, you probably aware that I run daily, I'm pretty active, and I exercise, but I try to implement walks daily as well. And on those walks, I do some self-talk and I'm just talking to myself throughout those 20 to 30 minutes. And it gets to a point where I'm like, you know what I'm saying, I need to reflect on later, and I will start writing that down. So whether it's a formal sit down and, hey, let's write for 10 to 30 minutes, or just on the fly, I'm writing more than I even realize. And to segue into how I created the book, it happened at a time, and we can talk about my incident when we talk about that later. But I started writing because I needed to just get stuff off my chest and my mind. And I told myself, listen, I'm going to write 10 minutes a day, and we're going to stay committed to that, regardless of it's in the morning, at night, minimum 10 minutes, no questions asked. And there would be days I wrote for 10 minutes. There was days that I wrote for 3 hours, and I stayed committed to that. And it was solely for the purpose of making me feel lighter, more like myself, and taking this weight or pressure off my shoulders that I felt that I was carrying on a day-to-day basis. So I think everybody should write at some capacity. You don't need to strive to be an author. I certainly was not. I didn't think that I would have a book at 28 years old, but writing is such a pivotal point in my daily routine and me feeling stress free and more myself that I think people would feel a lot better if they implemented some form of journaling, writing, whatever on a day to day basis.
I couldn't agree more. And as someone who also writes daily, I find that it's really great for two things. And of course, there are more than two benefits of writing. But for me, one is, like you mentioned, there are so many things going on inside of my mind, inside of my world, that inner dialogue, the ideas, the concerns, etc. To be able to take them out of my head and put them down on paper, there's a release there. It releases some pressure. And it also helps to organize thoughts, right? And we are the stories that we tell ourselves. And I think it's really hard to generate a really, concise, efficient, meaningful story when all the ideas are just bouncing between your ears. It's hard to keep track of things. And so to be able to mold your narrative in real time, daily, weekly, monthly with writing, I think is very powerful. And then the second part is just sheer documentation. I can't tell you how many times I've looked back a year, 2 years, 3 years on something that I've written and kind of forgot that it had happened until I read it back. And I think documenting our lives is really powerful for a number of reasons. But one example I'll give is, entrepreneurship for me has been this personal growth journey, emotional roller coaster. There are a lot of ups and downs. And at this point, 4 years in, there are these days where you just feel like you get hit by a bus. And I handle them so much better now because I have tangible proof when I look back on my journals of, oh, this happened 3 months ago, 9 months ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, and it always turned out okay. I was fine every single time. I have proof. I went through it, I processed it, and now I'll handle it a bit more quicker. I'll bounce back this time. And so, yeah, I think processing and reflecting are really important, and writing is a great way to do that. Before I shift gears here, do you have anything to add on top of that?
No, I agree with the whole like documentation side of things and being able to go back and reflect. And I think that's kind of the beautiful side of social media too. And for those that put their lives out there, not only to help others or because they simply enjoy it, but I think that's also a way of documenting and being able to go back, reflect on a moment, and say, "Hey, this is where I was, and this is how far I've grown." And when you start to view writing or anything creative in the sense of just documentation and utilizing it as a tool to track growth, I think is extremely beneficial.
Yeah. So, with that being said, I'll ask you the first big question that I ask everybody. And that is, when you look back at your entire life up until this point, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not get to choose for yourself?
The hardest thing I've had to handle that I didn't get to choose. Well, I guess the incident with my heart has got to be up there, and it's definitely a silver lining because I believe that if it didn't happen, I wouldn't be on this podcast with you discussing and sharing both of our stories. So I didn't get to choose it, but I'm a firm believer in everything happens for a reason. And like I've said in my book, you got to roll with the punches and figure it out and move forward.
Yeah. So, for people listening who haven't read the book, don't follow you, don't know what you're referring to, take us back to life before the incident. And then, if you're comfortable with it, take us through the incident.
Yeah. So I graduated college in 2016, former collegiate athlete, played lacrosse, went to grad school in 2016 to 2019, and got my doctorate in physical therapy. So fast forward to 2019, take my boards, get my license. I'm ecstatic, ready to give back to the world and do what I've been working so hard to do. And 6 months in, COVID happens. So, like, the whole healthcare industry, the world for that matter, kind of turns upside down. And going back to saying our original point that we earlier discussed, being somebody who likes to have a plan, likes to have things figured out, it kind of shook me because everything that I had in terms of my milestones, I'm going to do this year, it kind of turned everything upside down. I had to figure it out. And that was, I guess, maybe the start of the frustration that I was having with life in general, is because I was beginning to feel that nothing was going my way. And I don't want to sound insensitive, because obviously that was a very difficult time for so many people out there. But I'm just making a point that as somebody who is such a planner and organizer, this was very difficult for me. And then you fast forward 2 more years. Yeah, I guess it'd be about 2 more years. I'm 28 years old at the time. And I'm at this point in my career where I feel like I haven't brought it to where I want to be. My vision, I'm nowhere near that. I just feel stressed out, pressure daily. And I wake up on a Sunday morning and I have this incident with my heart. So, just to elaborate a little bit more about that, I woke up, went through my daily routine, no problems. Probably around 11 a.m., I start to feel my heart racing. And I start saying to myself, am I having a panic attack? So I assess my pulse and I notice that it's irregular. So for those who aren't aware, normally with a panic attack, you'll have rapid heart rate, but it won't be irregular. So I knew that something was up. And I don't know if this was a blessing or a curse, but I guess I had the knowledge. So I can't, I don't even know if it made me freak out more or less, to be honest. I kind of just blacked out, I guess. So yeah, so my heart's irregular. So I tell my parents, because I was living home at the time, and I said, my heart's racing. I can't get it down, but it's irregular. And they're like, all right, just try to relax. So I sit on the couch for a few minutes. I'm assessing my pulse, and I'm like, all right, something's up. This is not right. So I'm like, I think I'm going into AFib. So I call paramedics. They come, they hook me up to the leads. And here I am saying, like, am I throwing PVCs yet? And they're like, what do you do for a living? What is going on here? So they're like, yeah, we're taking you in. So they give me medication in the ambulance, and I don't respond to it. So I'm going to just stop here for a second. So you can imagine, here I am mentally already feeling like my life's not going the way I want it to go, and I can't catch a break. So now they give me medication that I'm supposed to respond to in the ambulance, doesn't work. We get to the hospital. They hook me up to an IV. They said, all right, now this medication, there's a 50-50 chance where if it doesn't work, we're going to have to do the cardioversion procedure. So obviously, I don't want that. For those who don't know, it's when they shock your heart back into normal rhythm. So they hook me up to the IV, to that medication that's supposed to work, and you guessed it, it does not. So now they let me know, all right, we're going to have to cardiovert you. The nurses come in, they hook me up to the paddles, and they said, all right, we're going to put you under now. And I told the nurse, I don't consent to that. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I want to be awake for it. And the nurse had to like sit with me or bedside and says, listen, man, I totally get that you're probably a tough guy, but this is insane. Like you can't do it. So I was denying pain medication. I didn't want them to do the fentanyl for the IV, and I was also denying them putting me under. They were eventually able to convince me to allow me to have the pain medication, but I stayed awake for it because I honestly feared that I wouldn't wake up. And it's so crazy to reflect and think back. It's just like when you're going through something like that, your mind is just like not acting in ways that you are used to. And it's so weird. And I kind of discussed this in my book, but even in the ambulance, I knew what was going on. I knew that I was going to be okay. But for whatever reason, I needed that reassurance, and I was craving it so much. I was asking the paramedics, am I going to die? I knew I wasn't going to die, but it's like you're in such a different state of mind. And I've never felt something like that where I innately knew that like what the answer was and that I was okay, but I was craving that reassurance so much. But yeah, so go back to they end up cardioverting me. I respond well to the cardioversion. My heart gets back into normal rhythm. And then, yeah, I saw the cardiologist the next day. I was on cardiac meds for 6 months. After 6 months, they took me off. And now I go for yearly checkups. But certainly not what I expected to experience at 28 years old. But nonetheless, has led me to write a book, connect with so many unique individuals, network, and it's very humbling and very grateful. I hate to use that as my title of the book. It's grateful for the opportunity, but I am extremely grateful that people have reached out and said, "Hey, I've read your book. It's helped me so much, and it's something that I turn back to on a day-to-day basis when I'm not feeling myself, and I can open it and turn to any random page, and I can gain something out of it." So, listen, everything happens for a reason, and if I can go back and change it, I wouldn't. So,
So just I'll take us back in my life a handful of years and then bring us back to your story. But I want to say, man, so we're about the same age. Are you 30 or 31 right now?
31.
Okay, me too. So, and it's funny because did you grow up in New Jersey?
Yeah.
All right, we both grew up in New Jersey. We both have Italian heritage. We both graduated college the same time, DPT school the same time. We're talking here. We have similar mindsets. It's funny. You have a better beard than I do. That's besides the point.
Hey,
I
don't
have
knock the stash, man.
but about probably 10 years ago, I was in a gym and gym's about to close. It's a Sunday afternoon, and there's maybe three or four of us in the gym. This guy falls off the treadmill. It shoots him back, and he's just on the ground, blue in the face, not responding. I had just taken a first aid certification, and so I'm like, of course this would happen. Like, there's literally three people in the gym, and I just took a first aid certification. This guy just had a heart attack. Thank goodness there was a firefighter there. The other guy was a firefighter. He stepped in. He's like, I got this. But we ended up putting the AED on him, and it defibrillated him a couple times, and he survived. But I can't imagine what it would be like to have a cardioversion while awake. Do you did you black out during that, or do you remember? Can you describe that at all?
The last thing I remember is 10 people around me. So I'm laying down and I have 10 people looking at me. And I hear, "All right, clear." And my chest comes off the table. I scream, "Son of a bitch." And I feel like, and you know what's funny? I was this close to asking a nurse to film it. I was so close, and I kind of wish I did. As crazy as that sounds, I was very close to saying, I want to be able to reflect on this moment. But that's a little psychotic of me, I guess. But the last thing I remember is screaming, "Son of a bitch," like levitating like 2 feet in the air. And after that, I don't know what happened. I guess I came back to my senses. I remember seeing my dad and my girlfriend, and I was like, "Hey, give me a garbage can." I started immediately vomiting, and it's probably because of the fentanyl, which I also didn't want. But yeah, that's all I remember from it. But I do remember being levitated off the table.
That is wild. Oh man. So okay, so through all of that, you stated everything happens for a reason. If you could go back and change it, you wouldn't. And I prescribe to the same perspective, right? One of my tattoos is a sprout, and it symbolizes the quote, sometimes when you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, but you've actually been planted, right? That perspective, that mindset that everything is happening for a reason. I think it's easier to look back on something that happened and say, I'm grateful for that now because I can see some of the dots that have connected. I think it's much harder to embrace that gratitude in the present moment when things suck, your mind is racing, it's hurting, it's hard, etc. In this season of life, for the next hard thing that comes up, what are some of the ways that you would try to approach gratitude before you can see how it all plays out? So when you're in the suck, how can you be grateful?
Yeah, I couple things. So when it happened to me, obviously being 28 years old and having to schedule an appointment with a cardiologist is not ideal. And I'm certainly not sitting there initially saying, "I'm so grateful that I got to experience this. Thank you, God, for allowing me to have a cardiac issue at 28 years old. Certainly not. I mean, that would be kind of unrealistic and unnatural, in my opinion, if that was my initial reaction. And now translating to when you're doing hard things, or there's hardships in life, or you're in a race and it's getting tough and things aren't panning out the way you want it to, or you're dealing with an injury in the middle of a marathon prep and you're starting to tell yourself that, like, why me? Why is this happening? Like, I have no luck. It's all a bunch of bull, And what has really grounded me, and I'll be the first to admit that, like, it's not easy for me. And being positive and being and having this type of mentality is a day-to-day basis. It requires writing, reflecting, reading. I'm not this overly joyous, positive person. There's plenty of times my girlfriend has to tell me, listen, you're totally contradicting what you preach to others. Take a step back and really reflect on what you're saying right now, because you're coming off as a hypocrite. And I need those moments of being called out, because it keeps me grounded and it keeps me on that right trajectory.
Mm.
But what I was going to say is that when you're in those moments of the suck and the hardship, what has helped me is that knowing that, like, I have the opportunity to embrace this and learn from it, while others don't even get the chance to embrace the suck, really is a true difference maker. You might be 90 miles into a 100-mile ultra marathon, and you're sitting there saying, this hurts. I want to quit. I'm so dehydrated. Mentally, I can't bear this anymore. But somebody out there would kill to just be able to walk a block, and you were able to just run 90 miles. So when you put it into perspective that there's somebody out there that would do anything to be in your shoes and even deal with the hardships that you're dealing with, it kind of makes you bite your tongue and say, listen, I got to take a step back. And just to reflect on a moment in graduate school, so this is going back to 2016 and 2019. I had a test review on a Thursday, and I commuted from New Jersey to New York. I'll keep this story very brief. And I'm driving to class. My car breaks down, and it's about 5 hours of this whole ordeal to get my car towed off the main highway into a town, back from that town back to New Jersey. It was an all-day affair. I missed the test review. A week later, driving for the test, car breaks down again. Whatever issue I paid $1,000 for wasn't fixed, and I was ended up being 2 hours late for the test. So here I am saying, why me? This, like, my luck, yada yada yada. But I did the test, all is good. We end up having a observation in the NICU at what I believe it was Westchester Medical.
Mm.
And we go for the day, and we're speaking with the nurses, the PTs, even some of the family members. And you get to see some of these newborns that may not make it to see another day. You're witnessing families that may be spending the last moment with their newborn child. And I hate to get dark here, but it was that moment I told myself, like, how could I bitch and moan about anything? My car breaking down, not getting a test score that I was striving so hard, not getting the result that I was training for. How can I complain about anything when there's people out there dealing with this? And I'm not saying it's wrong to feel frustrated, upset, angry. I think you're allowed to feel those emotions, but I think it's important to deal with those emotions in a short period of time and snap back to reality that what you're dealing with is not so bad.
Mm.
And it's moments like that, as sad and upsetting they were, and my heart goes out to all families dealing with those types of hardships. It's really kept me humble and grateful for my life, those that I have around me, and has made the hardships that I've experienced feel extremely minuscule compared to what others are dealing with.
I have so many thoughts, and so I'll try to keep these concise. I'll start with a story similar in some ways, but also different from yours. In 2018, my wife, me, a handful of other classmates, and a couple of our professors went down to Guatemala on a service trip, and we would set up camp in a hotel, and then we would drive 2 to 3 hours in a bus to a remote village. We'd tell the locals, hey, we're physical therapists, if you need help, come on down to whatever building or structure we set up in. And eventually by the end of the day it would be full, and we'd be helping people, and it was very fulfilling. There was this one morning I woke up, my phone hadn't charged. I guess I hadn't plugged it fully into the outlet, and had what, 10-20% battery, and I was frustrated that my iPhone, whatever model, was not charged. I was in a bad mood. So we drove 2-3 hours out to this remote village, dirt roads. That quote unquote houses are four wooden pillars with a tin roof, no walls, no running water, no electricity. It's 100 degrees, and we get word that there's this little boy with muscular dystrophy. So we walk however many minutes to his house, again a tin roof, and he's sitting in a wheelchair that doesn't function. It's a chair for his purposes. His knees and elbows are completely contracted. He can't use them at all. He maybe weighs 60 pounds, complete malnutrition. He was in a fire that he couldn't get out of a year before, so he has burns all over his body. And I remember having that same realization, like, okay, it's valid to be frustrated in the morning if your phone doesn't charge, but I can't carry that with me. Like, there are people out there who have it's so much worse. There are things that are actually serious that are happening to other people. I need to change my attitude. But the spin that's maybe a bit more positive than your experience was that we gave this kid a little toy car, like a Hot Wheels car. It was like a used Hot Wheels car, and we gave it to him. I'd never seen somebody so happy in my entire life. And I think the thing about the Guatemala trip for me is that the people there had so little compared to what we have here. And yet they were so happy and so grateful. And I think comparison is this weird thing where we're using comparison in a sense right now to set a perspective and say it could always be worse. But it also happens the other way. And I think a lot of people get caught up and have trouble being grateful or having gratitude because they look at somebody who has a bigger house, a quote unquote better job, a different life. And in comparison, it can feel hard to be grateful because we don't have as much, right? And so I'm curious, do you deal with that level of comparison in the other direction? And if so, do you catch yourself and bring yourself back down to earth? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly significantly less now that I've done a lot of this reflecting and since I've wrote the book. But I even mentioned in my book that I used to feel and get frustrated with the fact that like I would be doing all this work and working so hard to obtain a goal, and I would see those who were doing so much less get the same goal, and that would drive me crazy and it would make me frustrated. And I realized that you can't compare yourself to others and base your level of quote unquote success on what others are achieving. And the reality of life is that you are going to bust your ass to get to where you want to be. And there's going to be others that barely try and get to the same end result. And that's just the reality of the situation. And you're not going to be able to do anything about it. And if you start focusing so much on what others are achieving, you're taking away from your own story and what you are trying to build. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow at one point in time, because I always felt that if I was working hard to achieve something and I'm putting in countless hours, I should achieve it. That's just how the world should work. And unfortunately, it is not. And I felt that if somebody's barely trying, then they shouldn't get a great end result because they aren't trying. And why should they get what I'm working so hard to achieve if they're putting in minimal effort? It just doesn't make sense to me. And it goes back to you don't need to have all the answers and you don't need to figure it out. And you kind of just have to have this tunnel vision, worry about you, and do right by people, do right by yourself, and keep going.
Mm.
The more you focus on others, the less you're focusing on yourself. And when you're focusing less on yourself, you're doing a disservice to others because you are not becoming the best version of you for them.
Yeah. So a couple quick things here, and then I'll ask you another big picture question. But one is I've heard this phrase, I don't know where it's from, but wealth that is gifted is not a gift. In other words, when someone is given something, right, something comes easy, you're actually robbing that person, or that person is robbed of the gift, because the gift isn't the thing. The gift is not the outcome. The gift is the process and who you become through the process. And I think that's an important frame. And again, that comes from reflection. It comes from introspection. It comes from focusing on being the best version of yourself so that you can then serve other people. But the gift, the reward, it's not the outcome. It's not what somebody gets. It's who somebody becomes. And I think that's an important thing for people to keep in mind. And the other point that I had was just back to gratitude, right? You mentioned that you have those days where maybe you're not grounded. You need somebody to say, hey, you're not practicing what you preach. I have those days too. I think we all do. And it's important to have those people around us who we can trust to be honest and open and care about us. The other thing I like to think about is just because you have an umbrella doesn't mean you don't get wet, right? Like it could be a storm outside and you could throw up your umbrella. You might get a little wet still, right? And I think the same goes for using these tools of gratitude and perspective, right? You can have the umbrella in your pocket and say, I'm going to use gratitude today because it's a tough one. You might still feel some of those things. You might still feel frustrated or upset or woe is me, but being able to come back to earth, open up that umbrella and say, I'm going to protect myself from that and stay true to who I am. I think that's a skill that gets built over time, just like a muscle in the gym. And it's important to know that it's not always going to be perfect.
Absolutely.
So, with that being said, we talked about the cardiac incident, and that's one of the hardest things you've ever had to deal with that you did not choose. Now, I think you and I would both agree that choosing our hard and being exhausted from something that we chose is a privilege. What is the hardest thing that you've ever chosen to do on purpose, and why did you choose to do that thing?
Let's see.
And
Yeah, I mean, I've ran 2 marathons. I've done 30 miles for my 30th birthday. I recently
real,
just
real quick, we are the same person. I did that too. Okay, carry on.
for my 31st birthday, I rode 31,000 meters on my rower.
Wow.
So we're in the brainstorming for 32 next year. But yeah, there's been plenty of hard things that I've chosen to do. Attempting 50-mile run in a heat wave last summer, doing like a backyard ultra, and I ended up tapping out at 24 miles because I couldn't regulate my heart rate. That's neither here nor there. But yeah, I think tapping into these hard things is fun, and it really shows a lot about yourself, and there's a lot of self-reflection that happens, and it's just going back to the ability to be able to do those hard things. And I will continue to push my body for as long as I can. And I think that's where a lot of growth happens. A lot of learning happens, and everybody should choose to do hard things,
Yeah.
whether on a daily basis or at least one big hard thing per year.
Yeah. What's interesting is when I asked this question on the podcast, and this is episode 189. There have been a few bonus episodes. So, we're essentially at 200. So 200 conversations I've asked this question. And almost always people's minds, even if they don't end up going there for their final answer, they go to the physical, right? And I think there's a reason for that. I think on the surface, you could say, well, a lot of the people that are on this podcast, they care about fitness, they push themselves, etc. But I also think there's something deeper. And I think a lot of times our physical limits reveal our mental limits, and
Mhm.
physical pursuits, doing tangible, physical, hard things is a really great way to grow as a person from a mental, emotional, even spiritual standpoint. And so I'm curious, through all of those hard things you just mentioned, what are some of the ways that you've grown beyond just the physical, from a mental, emotional, or even spiritual standpoint? How have you grown?
Yeah, I feel that Um, I was always good at being like motivational and helpful to other human beings, and I really lacked that for myself, you know? And I needed to grow internally to really be my best version so I could help other people. And it's been a daily process. And I think what happened with the heart was obviously a pivotal moment that kind of shifted my mindset drastically. But this mental growth where it requires reading, writing on a daily basis, it's like I said, it's hard work. And to others, they might see this funny, motivational, hardworking guy, but unfortunately, they don't see what goes on behind the scenes and what I deal with on a daily basis. And I'm not sure a lot of my friends and even family understand some of my personal struggles. It's yeah, it's hard, and I'm struggling to put it into words because these last couple of years have been, I guess, harder for me mentally than I could have imagined. And it's trying to not resort back to that old mindset. And it can be very easy to do so. So it requires, like I said, work and effort to not fall into that trap.
The way that, well, first of all, I appreciate you sharing that. It definitely resonates with me, and I'm sure it resonates with people listening. The way I've visualized it for myself in the past is you take this aerial view on your life, and you're in this forest, right? All you can see is the tops of trees. You're in the middle, and you make these decisions as to how to think or how to act, and each time you make that choice, your decision, you're chopping down trees in different directions, and over the course of 31 years you've carved some paths, right? And like that path of being hard on yourself or being negative or whatever it is for anybody listening, if that's how you've been for 31 years, like that path is cleared, like it's developed, you've gotten pretty far, and therefore it's easier to travel down that path going forward because you've already done the work of chopping down those trees. But to choose a different direction, to choose gratitude, to choose optimism, to choose self-love or compassion, etc., if that's relatively unexplored in your world at this point in your life, you're going to have to chop down some trees. It's going to be hard work. It's going to take more effort. You're not going to want to do that if you just leave yourself to your own devices and you just say, I'm going to default to what I'm used to. Well, if you default to what you're used to, you're going to go further down that path that's already cleared. And if you don't want to go there, then you better turn in the other direction with an active decision and chop down some trees. And you're right. People don't see that, right? People don't see what goes on inside of our minds behind closed doors. And I think it's just helpful to hear that someone like you, someone like me, that we have those discussions inside of our minds, that we have those battles and dilemmas, and that we're not perfect, because I think it's just something that's, it's human. I think that is very human to struggle with things that we might just keep to ourselves. And so I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, of course. And I think many should learn the beauty of being vulnerable and opening up and not be so ashamed to have to be strong all the time. I think we often fall into this culture of I have to have this certain portrayal of who I am or uphold the standard of professionalism because I have my doctorate and I'm supposed to be knowledgeable. I'm supposed to have all this insight, have all the answers. I'm supposed to be mentally strong because if I'm not mentally strong, how can I be there to treat patients who aren't mentally strong? And while I take pride in the fact that I can confidently say I am so mentally tough. And when it comes to patient care and fighting for their rights, whether it's with insurance companies and providing optimal care and being compassionate and bringing people out of some of the dark places that they've been, I am 1000% confident that I am at my strongest for others. And I couldn't come to terms with the fact that why am I struggling to be at my strongest for myself? Why is it so hard for me to listen to what I'm explaining to other people that I am witnessing other people benefit from. I'm giving advice, they're getting better mentally, physically, spiritually. Why can't I resonate with what I'm telling other people? And that was something that's been so hard for me for a very long time. And I'm happy that I've made huge strides in getting there. And honestly, it's conversations just like this that I become so grateful for, because it, even in this short duration of not only knowing you personally, but this conversation in itself, I'm in the moment learning so much about how far I've come through your story, through my personal reflection. So I don't know. It just gets me so hyped to be here, because I can't explain it. It's just important and it's meaningful to me. So thank you for this.
And I feel all the same. And so thank you for this as well. And I would encourage people listening to go seek out conversations like this, not only to listen to, but to have, right? Find that person in your life who you can talk about these kinds of things with. And, one of the reasons I'm so grateful for the podcast is it's a great reason to do that. It's very, where else in life do you just sit down with someone for an hour and talk about these things? It's not as common, right? But I'll go back real quick to just one other note, because I do think that it's hard to take the advice we give to others. And I've reflected on this for myself. And I think of my mom. I'm not sure if she listens to the podcast at this point. She listened to like the first 10, and then she was probably like, okay, I get it. But so my mom, she'll, have, a little neck pain, back pain, whatever it is. And I'll come home, visit my parents, and she'll say, hey, what should I do about this? And the physical therapist in me kicks in, boom, this, and this. And then I check in with her in a week. Mom, how's your neck? Oh, it's still hurting. Oh, did you do any of the things that I said you should do? And she's like, no, because, and at first I was insulted, but what I have to keep in mind, and this is my point, to me, or to her, I should say, I am her son. She wiped my butt. She birthed me. She raised me. I am not a doctor of physical therapy with the authority, that outside level of respect and boundaries. I am her son. And I think for us, right, me to me, when I give myself advice, when I tell myself I should do these things, or you should, change the way you look at this, I'm taking advice from a very flawed person who has weird thoughts, or has had rough moments, or sees themselves as weak and unqualified and an imposter in certain areas of life. So how can I take advice from that person that I know so well? I think that, for me at least, is one of the hard, barriers to overcome, is how do I start to see myself maybe the way that others see me, because I've seen all the rough, raw, and not so great parts.
No, I totally get that.
Yeah. So, all right. So I've got two more questions for you. So this one's simple. This is the Project Endure podcast. And so when you hear the word endurance or endure, what comes to mind, or what does that mean to you?
So the first thing that comes to mind is actually struggle, and how our ability to deal with that struggle and how well it is. So when I hear endure, I immediately resort to my ability to be able to withstand something that I do not want to typically withstand in a normal circumstance. And I think that's what your building and your community that you have shows others, is that you're meant to be put in uncomfortable situations. You are meant to endure them, and you're meant to overcome them eventually. And I feel that with the foresight that you have given through your podcast, through your social media, and just the conversations that I had the ability to experience in person, it really shows others that life is going to be tough. You're going to have to endure it, and you will come out on the other side and get over it, and you will be victorious.
I love that. And I appreciate you sharing it that way, because, you know, I think we can all endure alone. That is possible. People have done it, people do it. I think it's a lot. I don't even want to say easier, even though I think it is easier, but I think it's a lot more of an enjoyable, meaningful experience to walk with other people, knowing that we are all going through hard things beneath the surface. Life is not supposed to be easy. And to be in a room or have a conversation with someone like yourself, where you see life in a way that is inspirational, optimistic, there's possibilities, even if you might not always feel that in every single moment of your life. To have conversations like this and to be in places like that, it's the spark that I think a lot of us need to continue enduring. And so I'll transition this into the final question, which is again a very simple question, but my favorite. There are people listening to this all over the world who are going through hard things, tough seasons, struggles, etc. Some of them were chosen by life, some of them were chosen by them. But regardless, if someone's just having a tough time right now, what would you say to them?
In the simplest terms, it's all going to be okay. And you're going to learn, you're going to grow, whether it's through uh, hard times, sadness, anger, frustration. You will get through it. You will connect with the right people. There is an audience that is rooting for you, whether you believe it or not. And it doesn't need to be thousands of people. It can be one or two people. There are those that believe in you and want to see you succeed. And while it might feel very uncomfortable right now, there's going to come a time where you look back and say, hey, I got through this and it wasn't so bad. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to endure these struggles and these hardships because it's made me who I am today.
And I would speak on both of our behalves to say that if someone listening to this is in that tough season, that we would both be one, rooting for them, but two, here if they needed some encouragement, guidance, etc. And people know where to find me, but if someone wanted to reach out to you, to thank you, to learn more about the book, to follow along, etc., where's the best place for people to do that, Tyler?
So I'm on all social media platforms at Dr.Tylervan, so Dr.Tylervan. And my book, Grateful for the Opportunity, is available on Amazon.
Amazing. Well, I will make sure to link things below. And I just want to thank you, Tyler. I thank every guest and I mean it, but this has especially been a great way for me to kick off this weekend. And it's been, I don't know, I'm fired up. I told you before we started recording, I've had a few cups of coffee, but this was better than any of those cups. And so thank you.
And thank you. I really appreciate your time and allowing me to come onto your platform to express how I've dealt with things and my story. So thank you again.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Endure podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Endure Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.